What do you do when you finish an entire 40, no, I think it was 49-minute video, and then you realize halfway in you hit your mic and turned it off? Well, you split into two videos, don't you? It's awesome. So I think I've got this perfectly down, and we're gonna start on question 10. Y'all get to laugh at me a lot. Um, when the party leaves for the city, who travels together and in what cars? This is where things you gotta, because remember we talked about this as partially a mystery. You gotta keep this straight. So we've got Gatsby is in Tom's car with Daisy. Then in Gatsby's car, we've got Tom, Nick, and Jordan. So far, so good. Keep that in your mind. It's actually really, 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 really important. And back to the story. Now I gotta remember where I left off because I heard it off my mic. Here we go. Okay. We were all irritable now with the fading ale and the aware of it. We drove for a while in silence. Then Dr. J.T. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road. I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline. Remember, and J.T. Eckelberg, you guys need to go back over to your classroom, open up your symbolism, because here's another example of where this is actually used here. Now, these eyeballs come over the hillside, and because it's a billboard, and he's like, oh man, we're going to run out of gas. Gatsby told us we're going to run out of gas. We need to stop and get gas. We got enough to get us to town, said Tom. But there's a garage right here, objected Jordan. I don't want to get all stalled in this baking heat. And of course, why doesn't Tom want to stop? You know why Tom doesn't want to stop. Because Myrtle's there. Tom threw on both brakes impatiently, and we slid to an abrupt, dusty stop under the Wilson sign. After a moment, the proprietor emerged from the interior of his establishment and gazed hollow-eyed at the car. Let's have some gas, cried Tom roughly. What do you think we stopped for? To admire the view? I'm sick, said Wilson without moving. I've been sick all day. What's the matter? I'm all run down. Well, shall I help myself? Tom demanded. You sounded well enough on the phone. With an effort, so now we know who was on the phone. It wasn't Myrtle, it was Myrtle's husband. Okay. With an effort, Wilson left the shade and support of the doorway, and breathing hard, unscrewed the cap of the tank. In the sunlight, his face was green. I don't mean to interrupt your lunch, he said, but I need money pretty bad. And I was wondering what you were doing with with your old car. How do you like this one? Inquired Tom. I bought it last week. It's a nice yellow one, said Wilson, as he strained at the handle. Like to buy it? Big chance, Wilson smiled faintly. No, but I could make some money off the other. What do you want money for all of a sudden? I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west. Your wife does? Exclaimed Tom, startled. She's been talking about it for 10 years. He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes. And now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away. The coupe flashed by us with a flurry of dust and the flash of a waving hand. What do I owe you? Demanded Tom harshly. I just got wised up to something funny in the last 2 days, remarked Wilson. That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car. What do I owe you? $1.20. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment before I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't enlightened to Tom. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race, so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty, as if he had just got some poor girl with child. I'll let you have the car, said Tom. I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon. The locality was always vaguely disquieting, even in the broad glare of the afternoon, and now I turned my head as though I had been warned for something behind. Over the ash heaps the giant eyes of Dr. J.T. Eckelberg kept their vigil, but I perceived after a moment that other eyes were regarding us with peculiar intensity from less than 20 feet away. Let's stop there. So we have this interlude between Wilson and Tom, and he tells him, I've come to some things going on with my wife. 2 days ago, I figured it out, and I got to get her out of here. I've got to go west. And when he means west, he doesn't mean like California. At this point, he's talking about just getting her out of the New York area. And he's like, we got to get out of here. She's talked about it for 10 years. She wanted to leave here. So he's thinking that if he takes her away, that somehow that will make everything better. But Tom also realizes, oh man, he's gone to me. So he actually offers to give him his car, just so he can get rid of Myrtle because it's now, oh crap, he knows. And he doesn't want this sticky situation. And then we have this Dr. J.T. Eckelberg's eyes are looking over him. They're looking at you. In one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face, like objects into a slowly developing picture. Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression that I had often seen in women's faces, but on Myrtle Wilson's face it seemed purposeless and inexplicable, until I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife. There is no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind. And as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago, secure and inviolate. Sorry. Where'd they go? Okay. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago secure and inviolate, were slipping precariously from his control. Instinct made him step on the accelerator with the double purposes of overtaking Daisy and leaving Wilson behind, and we sped along towards Astoria at 50 miles an hour, until among the spidery girders of the elevated we came to the sight of an easy-going blue coupe. Those big movies around 50th Street are cool, suggested Jordan. I love New York on summer afternoons, when everyone's away. There's something very sensuous about it, overripe, as if all sorts of funny fruits were going to fall into your hands. The word sensuous had the effect of further disquieting Tom. Before he could invent a protest, the coupe came to stop, and Daisy signaled us to drop alongside. Where are we going? She cried. How about the movies? It's so hot, she complained. You go. We'll ride around and meet you after. With an effort, her wit rose faintly. We'll meet you on some corner. I'll be the man smoking 2 cigarettes. We can't argue about it here, Tom said impatiently, as the truck gave out a cursing whistle behind us. You followed me to the south side of Central Park, in front of the Plaza Hotel. Several times he turned his head and looked back at the car, and if the traffic delayed them, he slowed up until they came into sight. And I think he was afraid that they would dart down a side street and be out of his life forever. But they didn't. And we all took the less explicable step of engaging the parlor of the suite at the Plaza Hotel. The prolonged and tumultuous argument that ended up by herding us into the room eludes me, though I have a sharp physical memory that, in the course of it, my underwear kept climbing up like a damp snake round my legs, and intermittent beads of sweat raced cool across my back. The notion originated with Daisy's suggestion that we hire 5 bathrooms and take cold baths, then assumed more tangible form as a place to have a mint julep. Each of us said over and over that it was a crazy idea, and we all talked at once to a baffled clerk, and thought or pretended to think that we were being very funny. The room was large and stifling, and though it was already 4 o'clock, opening the windows admitted only a gust of hot shrubbery from the park. Daisy went to the mirror and stood with her back to us, fixing her hair. It's a swell suite, whispered Jordan respectfully, and everyone laughed. Open another window, commanded Daisy, without turning round. There aren't any more. Well, we'd better telephone for an axe. The thing to do is forget about the heat, said Tom immediately. Well, you make it 10 times worse by crabbing about it. He unrolled a bottle of whiskey from the towel and put it on the table. "Why not let her alone, old sport?" remarked Gatsby. "You're the one that wanted to come to town." There was a moment of silence, and the telephone book slipped from its nail and splashed on the floor, whereupon Jordan whispered, "Excuse me." But this time no one laughed. "I'll pick it up," I offered. "I've got it," Gatsby exclaimed. The parting string had muted him. In an interesting way, and tossed the book on the chair. "It's a great expression of yours, isn't it?" said Tom sharply. "What is?" "All this old sport business. Where'd you pick it up?" "Now you see, Tom," said Daisy, turning around from the mirror, "if you're going to make personal remarks, I won't stay a minute. Call up and order some ice for the mint julep." As Tom took to the receiver, the compressed heat exploded into a sound that we were listening to the portentous chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March from the ballroom below. "So somebody's getting married in this heat." "Imagine marrying anybody in this heat!" cried Jordan in dismay. "Still, I was married in the middle of June," Daisy remembered. "Louisville in June. Somebody fainted." "Who was it fainted, Tom?" "Bloxy," he answered shortly. "The man's named Bloxy. Bloxy. He made boxes. That's a fact, and he's from Biloxi, Tennessee." "They carried him into my house," amended Jordan, "because we lived just 2 doors from the church, and he stayed 3 weeks until Daddy told him he had to get out. The day after he left, Daddy died." After a moment, she added, as if she thought it sounded irreverent, "There wasn't any connection." Okay, that's kind of a weird thing to say. Okay, in the first stages of heat exhaustion, you start getting confused and you might have a tendency to ramble. I think this might be them. "I used to know a Bill Bloxy from Memphis," I remarked. "That was his cousin. I knew his whole family history before he left. He gave me an aluminum putter, and I used today. I used today." The music had died down and the ceremony began, and after a long cheer floated out the window, followed by an intermittent cries of "Yay, yay, yay," and finally a burst of jazz, and the dancing began. "We're getting old," said Daisy. "If we were young, we'd rise and dance." "Remember Biloxi?" Jordan warned her. Where'd you know him from, Tom?" "Biloxi?" He concentrated with effort. "I don't know. I don't know him. He was a friend of Daisy's." "He was not," she denied. "I'd never seen him before. He came down in a private car." "Well, he said he knew you. He said he was raised in Louisville. Asa Bird brought him around last minute and asked if we had room for him." Jordan smiled. "He was probably bumming his way home. He told me he was president of your class at Yale." Tom and I looked at each other blankly. Biloxi? First place? We didn't have any president. Gatsby's foot beat a short, restless tattoo, and Tom eyed him suddenly. "By the way, Mr. Gatsby, I understand you're an Oxford man." "Not exactly. Oh, yes, I understand you went to Oxford." "Yes, I went there." A pause, and Tom's voice, incredulous and insulting. "You must have gone there about the time Biloxi went to New Haven." So he's basically calling out Gatsby as being a liar. Another pause. A waiter knocked and came in, with the crushed mint and the ice. But the silence was unbroken by the "thank you" and a soft closing of the door. The tremendous detail was up to be cleared up at last. "I told you I went there," said Gatsby. "I heard you, but I'd like to know when." "It was 1919. I stayed only for 5 months. That's why I can't really call myself an Oxford man." Tom glanced around to see if he was mirrored in disbelief, but we were all looking at Gatsby. "It was an opportunity they gave to some of the officers after the armistice," he continued. "We could go to any of the universities in England or France." I wanted to get up and slap him on the back. I had one of those renewals of complete faith in him that I experienced before. Daisy rose, smiling faintly, and went to the table. "Open the whiskey, Tom," she ordered, "and I'll make you a mint julep. Then you won't seem so stupid yourself. Look at that mint. Look at the mint." "Wait a minute," snapped Tom. "I want to ask Mr. Gatsby one more question." "Go on," Gatsby said politely. "What kind of row are you trying to cause in my house, anyhow?" They were out in the open at last, and Gatsby was content. He isn't causing a row. A row being a fight. Daisy looked desperately from one to the other. You're causing a row. Please have a little self-control. Self-control, repeated Tom incredulously. I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and tell Mr. Nobody from nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's the idea, you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions, and next they'll throw everything overboard and have some intermarriage between black and... Oh, have to reload. Now we have, of course, the big reminder that Tom is a huge bigot. Because, of course, Tom is a huge bigot. Now, again, this was to show the bigotry that was in the upper class, and that no matter how they might try to seem on paper, in reality, they did have some bigoted ideas and some extraordinarily ugly beliefs. And so, again, that's our author just showing again that there was a huge problem with the upper class, and that you couldn't really believe what you read in the papers or what they said on the radio, because in reality, behind closed doors, they were still a bunch of racist bigots. Sorry. They'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. Flushed with his impassioned gibberish, he saw himself standing alone in the vast barrier of civilization. We're all white here, murmured Jordan. I know I'm not very popular. I don't give big parties. I suppose you got to make your house into a pigsty in order to have any friends in the modern world. Angry as I was, as we all were, I was tempted to laugh whenever he opened his mouth. The transition from libertine to prig was just so complete. So what he's saying, like, what are you talking about, man? You have a mistress who you keep in gin in a little apartment in New York, and you're talking about how marriage is an institution that should be respected. Are you joking? Are you kidding? He's like, you're sitting there telling all these people that, you're not being a good person because you're not valuing marriage, when he himself has a mistress who they stopped at. Let's go take a look at our questions real quick. Let's take a look at our yep. Okay, so sorry, it's just too much. What does Tom learn at the gas station? How does he react to this news? He learns that Wilson knows his wife is having an affair. He learns that she really is going to leave him. And so how does Tom react? He's like, good, getting rid of her. So here, have my car, take the money from that, get the hell out. And he's doing this not because he feels bad that he has been sleeping with Myrtle. He does this because he doesn't want to see Myrtle anymore. 13. Where does the party decide to go when they get into the city? They go to the Plaza Hotel because they can't decide what to do. And they're thinking that at least that place has ice and they can be cool. Describe the conflict in the hotel room. This is like one huge, gigantic, mix of bad, because we've got Daisy's trying to pretend like nothing's happening. Jordan's just enjoying the show. Nick's kind of starting to get a little iffy because he's getting a little fuzzy because he's so hot. And then we have Tom knows that his wife is having an affair with Gatsby, and he and Gatsby are having back and forth and having a fight. Meanwhile, Daisy's like, leave him alone. And then Tom is sitting there trying to show that Gatsby is fake, but Gatsby literally answers every question. And then he even gets to put in there, I'm also a war hero. And meanwhile, Tom finally says, I know that you're sleeping with my wife. And you're destroying the institution of marriage. Tom, who has a mistress. Yeah. What does Gatsby want Daisy to admit? Okay, we haven't got there yet, so let's go back. Yeah. We got something to tell you, old sport, began Gatsby, but Daisy guessed his intention. Please don't. She interrupted helplessly. Please let's all go home. Why don't we all go home? That's a good idea. I got up. Come on, Tom. Nobody wants a drink. Nobody wants a drink. I want to know what Mr. Gatsby has to tell me. Your wife doesn't love you, said Gatsby. She never loved you. She loves me. You must be crazy, exclaimed Tom automatically. Gatsby sprang to his feet, vivid in excitement. She never loved you. Do you hear? He cried. She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. It was a terrible mistake, but in her heart she never loved anyone except me, which is what he wants to be the truth. At this point, Jordan and I tried to go, but Tom and Gatsby insisted with competitive firmness that we remain. So him and Jordan are like, whoop, time to go. And they're like, no, you stay. They're like, oh, God, I don't want to watch this. As though neither of them had anything to conceal, and it would be a privilege to partake in vicariously in their emotions. Sit down, Daisy. Tom's voice groped unsuccessfully for a paternal tone. What's been going on? I want to hear all about it. I told you what's been going on, said Gatsby. Going on for 5 years, and you don't know. Tom turned to Daisy sharply. You've been seeing this fellow for 5 years? Not seeing, said Gatsby. No, couldn't meet. But both of us loved each other over all that time, old sport. You didn't know? I used to laugh sometimes, but there was no laughter in his eyes. To think that you didn't know. Oh, that's all. Tom tapped his thick fingers together like a clergyman and leaned back in his chair. You're crazy, he explained. He exploded. I can't speak about what happened 5 years ago because I didn't know Daisy then. And I'll be damned if I see how you got within a mile of her unless you brought the groceries to the back door. But all the rest of that's God's damn lie. Daisy loved me when she married me, and she loves me now. No, said Gatsby, shaking his head. She does, though. The trouble is that sometimes she gets foolish ideas in her head and doesn't know what she's doing. He nodded sagely. And what's more, I love Daisy too. Once in a while I go off on a spree and make a fool of myself, but I always come back, and in my heart I love all the time. You're revolting, said Daisy. She turned to me, and her voice, dropping to an octave lower, filled the room with a thrilling scorn. Do you know why we left Chicago? I'm surprised that they didn't treat you to the story of that little spree. Gatsby walked over to her and stood beside her. Daisy, that's all over now, he said earnestly. It doesn't matter any more. Just tell him the truth, that you never loved him. It's all wiped away forever. She looked at him blindly. What? How could I love him, possibly? You never loved him. She hesitated. Her eyes fell on Jordan and me with a sort of appeal, as though she realized at last that what she was doing, as though she had never all along intended doing anything at all. But it was done now. It was too late. I never loved him, she said with perceptible reluctance. Not Capolini? Demanded Tom suddenly. No. From the ballroom beneath, muffled, suffocating chords were drifting up to the hot waves of air. Not the day I carried you down from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry? There was a husky tenderness in the tone. Daisy? Please don't. Her voice was cold, but the rancor was gone from it. She looked at Gatsby. There, Jay, she said, but her hand, as she tried to light a cigarette, was trembling. Suddenly she threw a cigarette and the burning match into the carpet. Oh, you want too much, she cried to Gatsby. I love you now. Isn't that enough? I can't help what's past. She began to sob helplessly. I did love him once, but I loved you too. Gatsby's eyes opened and closed. You love me too? He repeated. Even that's a lie, said Tom savagely. She didn't know you were alive. Why, there were things between Daisy and me that you'll never know, things that neither of us can ever forget. The words seemed to bite physically into Gatsby. I want to speak to Daisy alone, he insisted. She's all excited now. Even alone, I can't say I never loved Tom, she admitted in a pitiful voice. It wouldn't be true. Of course it wouldn't, agreed Tom. She turned her head. As if it mattered to you, she said. Of course it matters. I'm going to take better care of you from now on. You don't understand, said Gatsby, with a touch of panic. You're not going to take care of her any more. I'm not? Tom opened his eyes wide and laughed. He could afford to lose control of himself now. Why's that? Daisy's leaving you. Nonsense. I am, though, she said with visible effort. She's not leaving me. Tom's words suddenly leaned down over Gatsby. Certainly not for a common swindler who'd have to steal a ring to put it on her finger. I won't stand this, cried Daisy. Oh, please let us get out. Who are you, anyhow? Broke out Tom. You're one of a bunch that hangs around with my Wolfshelm. What much I happen to know, I've made a little investigation into your affairs, and I'll carry it further tomorrow. You can suit yourself about that, old sport, said Gatsby steadily. I found out what your drug stores were. He turned to us and spoke rapidly. He and this Wolfshelm bought up a lot of side street drug stores here and in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. That's one of his little stunts. I picked him up for a bootlegger the first time I saw him. I wasn't far wrong. What about it? Said Gatsby politely. I guess your friend Walter Chase isn't too proud to come in on it. And you left him in the lurch, didn't you? You let him go to jail for a month over at New Jersey. God, you ought to hear Walter on the subject of you. He came to us dead broke. He was very glad to pick up some money, old sport. Don't you call me old sport, cried Tom. Gatsby said nothing. Walter could have you up and on the betting laws too, but Wolfshelm scared him into the shut in his mouth. That unfamiliar yet unrecognizable look was back again on Gatsby's face. The drugstore business is small change, continued Tom slowly. But you've got something on now that Walter's afraid to tell me about. I glanced at Daisy, who was staring terrified between Gatsby and her husband, and at Jordan, who had begun to balance an invisible but absorbing object on the tip of her chin. When I turned back to Gatsby, I was startled at his expression. He looked, and this is said in a contempt for babbled slander of his garden, as if he had killed a man. For a moment, set of his face could be described as just that fantastic way. It passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against the accusations that had been made. But with every word she was drawing further and further into herself. So he gave up, and only the dead dream fought this afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible, struggling unhappily, undespairingly, towards the lost voice across the room. The voice begged him again, Please, Tom. I can't stand this any more. Her frightened eyes told that whatever intentions, whatever courage she had, was definitely gone. You two start for home, Daisy, said Tom, in Mr. Gatsby's car. She looked at Tom, alarmed now, but he insisted with magnanimous scorn. Go on, he won't annoy you. I think he realizes that his presumptions a little flirtation are over. They were gone. After a word snapped out, made accidental, isolated like ghosts even from our pity. After a moment, Tom got up and began wrapping the unopened bottle of whiskey in the towel. Want any of this stuff, Jordan? Nick? I didn't answer. Nick? He asked again. What? Want any? No. I just remembered that today's my birthday. I was 30. Before me stretched the pretentious, menacing road of new decade. It was 7 o'clock when we got into the coupe with him and started for the Long Island. Tom talked incessantly, exulting and laughing, but his voice was remote from Jordan and me as we feigned clamor on the as foreign as the clamor on the sidewalk. Our tumult of the tumult of the elevated overhead. Human sympathy has its limits, and we were content to let all of the tragic arguments fade into the city lights behind. 30. The promise of a decade of loneliness, a thinning list of single men to know, a thinning brief case of enthusiasm, thinning hair. But there was Jordan beside me, who, unlike Daisy, was too wise ever to carry well-forgotten dreams from age to age. As we passed over the dark bridge, her wan face fell lazily against my coat. shoulder, and formidable stroke of 30 died away with a reassuring presence of pressure of her head. So we drove on toward death through the cooling twilight. The young Greek, Michaelis, who ran the coffee joint beside the ash heaps, was the principal witness in the inquest. He had slept through the heat until 5, when he strolled over to the garage and found George Wilson sick in his office, really sick, pale as his own pale hair, and shaking all over. Michaelis advised him to go to bed, but Wilson refused, saying that he'd miss a lot of business if he did. While his neighbor was trying to persuade him, a violent racket broke out overhead. "I've got my wife locked up in there," explained Wilson. "She's going to stay there until the day after tomorrow, and then we're going to move away." Michaelis was astonished. They had been neighbors for 4 years, and the Wilson had never seemed faintly capable of such a statement. Generally, he was one of those worn-out men. When he wasn't working, he sat in a chair by the doorway and stared at the people in the cars that passed along the road. When anyone spoke to him, he invariably laughed in an agreeable, colorless way. He was his wife's man, not his own. So naturally, Michaelis tried to find out what had happened, but Wilson wouldn't say a word. Instead, he began to throw curious, suspicious glances at his visitor and asked him if he had been doing at certain times on certain days. Just as so, he thinks his friend is actually the guy that's sleeping with his wife. Little does he know. Just as the latter was getting uneasy, some workmen came past the door, bound for his restaurant, and Michaelis took the opportunity to get away, intending to come back later. He didn't. He supposed he forgot to, that's all. When he came back outside again a little after 7, he was reminded of the conversation because he heard Mrs. Wilson's voice loud and scolding downstairs in the garage. "Beat me!" he heard her cry. "Throw me down and beat me, you dirty little coward!" A moment later she rushed out in the dusk, waving her hands and shouting. Before he could move from his door, the business was over. The death car, as the newspapers called it, didn't stop. It came out of the gathering darkness, wavered tragically for a moment, and then disappeared around the next bend. Michaelis wasn't even sure of its color. He told the first policeman it was light green. The other car, the one going towards New York, came to the rest 100 yards beyond, and its driver hurried back to where Myrtle Wilson, her life violently extinguished, knelt in the road and mingled her thick, dark blood with the dust. Michaelis and this man reached her first, but they had torn open her shirt waist until, damp with perspiration, they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen to the heart beneath. The mouth was wide open, ripped at the corners, as though she had choked a little in giving up her tremendous vitality, and was as she had stored for so long. 1 second, if you please. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I thought I'd actually paused, but I didn't. Lily needed a little love, and to be told that she was an okay girl. Okay, here we go. So, Myrtle's dead. Somebody hit her, going a high rate of speed, driving a light car. I wonder who it was. We saw 3 or 4 automobiles in the crowd when we were still some distance away. "Wreck," said Tom. "That's good. Wilson will have a little business at last." He slowed down, but still without any intentions of stopping, until as we came near, the hushed, intent faces of the people in the garage door made him automatically put on the brakes. "We'll take a look," he said doubtfully. "Just a look." I became aware now of a hollow wailing sound which issued incessantly from the garage, and a sound which, as we got out of the coupe and walked towards the door, resolved itself towards "Oh my God!" uttered over and over again by a gasping moan. "There's some bad trouble here," said Tom excitedly. He reached up on his tiptoes and peered. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay, so Tom's like really kind of like, hey, there's some bad trouble here. Let's take a look. Yeah. He reached up on tiptoes and peered over the circle of heads in the garage, which was lit only by a yellow light and a swinging wire basket overhead. Then he came a harsh sound in his throat. With a violent thrusting movement, his powerful arms pushed his way through. The circle closed up again with a running murmur of exposition. It was a minute before I could see anything at all. The new arrivals disarranged the line, and Jordan and I were pushed suddenly aside. Myrtle Wilson's body wrapped in a blanket, and then another blanket, as though she had suffered from a chill on a hot night, lay on the work table by the wall, and Tom, with his back to us, was bending over it motionless. Next to him stood a motorcycle policeman taking down names. It was with much sweat and correction in a little book. At first, I couldn't find the source of the high groaning words that were echoed clamorously through the bare garage. Then I saw Wilson standing on the raised threshold of his office, swaying back and forth, holding onto the doorposts with both hands. Some man was talking to him in a low voice and attempting from time to time to lay a hand on his shoulder, but Wilson neither heard nor saw. His eyes were dropped slowly from the swinging light-laden table by the wall, then jerked back to the light again, and gave up incessantly his high, horrible call. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Presently Tom lifted his head with a jerk, as if staring around the garage with gazed eyes, and addressed in mumbled, incoherent remark to the policeman. M-A-V, the policeman was saying. O-N-O-R, corrected the man. M-A-V-R-O. Listen to me, muttered Tom fiercely. R, said the policeman. O, G, G. He looked up as Tom's broad hand fell sharply on his shoulder. What do you want, fella? What happened? That's what I want to know. Auto hit her. Instantly killed her. Instantly killed, repeated Tom, staring. She ran out in the road. Son of a bitch didn't even stop his car. There was 2 cars, said Michaelis. One coming, one going, see? Going where? Said the policeman keenly. One going each way. Well, his hand rose towards the blankets and stopped halfway and fell to the side. She ran right out there, and one coming from New York knocked her right into a going 30-40 miles an hour. What's the name of this place here? Demanded the officer. Hadn't got any name. A pale, well-dressed Negro stepped nearer. It was a yellow car, he said. A big yellow car. New. See the accident? Said the policeman. No, but the car passed me down the road, going faster, and 40, going 50, 60. Come here and let us have your name. Look out now. I want to get his name. Some words of the conversation must have reached Wilson, swaying in the office door, for suddenly a new theme found his voice among the grasping cries. You don't have to tell me what kind of car it was. I know what kind of car it was. Watching Tom, I saw the wad of muscled back of his shoulder tighten under his coat. He walked quickly over to Wilson, standing in front of him, seizing him firmly by the upper arms. You got to put yourself together, he said with a soothing gruffness. Wilson's eyes fell upon Tom, and he stared up on his tiptoes. He would have collapsed to his knees had it not been Tom held him upright. Listen, said Tom, shaking him a little. I just got here a minute ago from New York. I was bringing you my coupe we've been talking about. The yellow car I was driving this afternoon wasn't mine, do you hear? I haven't seen it all afternoon. Oh. So he's afraid since he was seen driving the yellow car, they're going to think it was him. But who was in the yellow car? Oh, Gatsby. And Daisy. Only the Negro and I were near enough to hear what he said, but the policeman caught something in the tone and looked over with the truculent eyes. What was all that? He demanded. I'm a friend of his. Tom turned his head to keep his hands from Wilson's body. He says he knows the car that did it. It's a yellow car. Some dim impulse moved the policeman to look suspiciously at Tom. What color's your car? A blue car, a coupe. We've come straight from New York, I said. Someone who had been driving a little behind us had confirmed this, and the policeman turned away. Now, if you let me have the name again, correct? Picking up Wilson like a doll, Tom carried him into the office, set him down on the chair, and came back. If somebody'll come here and sit with him, he snapped authoritatively. He watched while 2 men standing closest glanced at each other and went unwillingly into the room. When Tom shut the door on them and came down the single step, his eyes avoiding the table. As he passed close, he whispered, Let's get out. Self-consciously, with the authoritative arms breaking the way. We pushed through, and still gathering crowd, passing a hurried doctor, case in hand, who had just been sent for with wild hope half an hour ago. Tom drove slowly until we were beyond the bend. Then his foot came down hard, and the coupe raced along through the night. In a little while he heard the low, husky sob, and saw the tears were overflowing down his face. The goddamn coward, he whimpered. He didn't even stop his car. The Buchanan's house floated suddenly toward through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stopped beside the porch and looked up at the second floor, where 2 windows bloomed with light along with vines. Daisy's home, he said, as if he got out of the car, and he glanced at me and frowned slightly. I ought to have dropped you at West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we can do tonight. A change had come over him as he spoke gravely, with decision. As we walked across the moonlight gravel of the porch, he disposed of the situation with a few brisk phrases. I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home. While you're waiting, you and Jordan better go to the kitchen and have them give you some supper, if you want any. He opened the door. Come in. No, thanks. But I'm glad you ordered me a taxi. I'll wait outside. Jordan put her hand in my arm. Won't you come in, Nick? No, thanks. Now, this is a huge symbolic moment because Tom's like, come be with us. And Jordan's like, yeah, be with us. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to be part of this, man. No. I'm going to remain that third party. I'm going to remain outside the situation and watch what's going down, but I'm not taking sides. And let's see how this goes. No, thanks. I was feeling a little sick and I wanted to be alone, but Jordan lingered over there for a moment. It's only 9:30, she said. I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too. She must have seen something in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps in the house. Pardon me. I sat down for a few minutes in my head, my hands, till I heard the phone taken up inside, and the butler's voice calling a taxi. When I walked slowly down the drive away from the house, intending to wait by the gate, I hadn't gone 20 yards when I heard my name. A Gatsby stepped from between 2 bushes on the path, and I must have felt pretty weird by the time, because I could think of nothing except the luminosity of his pink suit under the moon. What are you doing? I inquired. Just standing out here, old sport. Somehow that seemed to be a despicable occupation. For all I knew, he was going to rob the house at any moment. I wouldn't have been surprised to see sinister faces, the faces of Wolfhelm's people, behind him in the dark shrubbery. So all of a sudden, his friend is now a criminal and therefore capable of anything. Did you see any trouble on the road? He asked after a minute. Yes. He hesitated. Was she killed? Yes. I thought so. Oh, no. Tom's like, well, you killed this woman. Of course you're a bad guy. I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should all come at once. She stood it pretty well. He spoke as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered. I got to West Egg by the side road, he went on, and I left the car in the garage. I don't think anybody saw us, but of course I can't be sure. I disliked him so much by this time that I didn't find it necessary to tell him he was wrong. Who was the woman? He inquired. Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage. How the devil did it happen? Well, I tried to swing the wheel, he broke off, and suddenly I guessed the truth. Was Daisy driving? Yes, he said after a moment. But of course, I'll say I was. You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous, and she thought it would steady her to drive. And this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, though we were somebody she knew. Oh, so Myrtle saw Tom driving the yellow car, so she went out to go get Tom, and she got hit. And everybody thinks Gatsby's going to do it, and Gatsby will take the heat for it, but it was Daisy who didn't stop. If we remember going backwards, we had foreshadowing of this because we had that one rich person who hit the wall, and it's like, I didn't hit the wall. It's like, man, you hit the wall. You sheared your tire off. You hit the wall. And Daisy, she hit the woman, and being a rich person didn't stop. She didn't take responsibility for action. At least that's what the author is trying to say. Let us continue. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman towards the other car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back, and the second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly. It ripped her open. Don't tell me, old sport. He winced. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she couldn't, so I pulled the emergency brake. Then she fell over into my lap, and I drove on. She's all right. Lily, I'm taping. I promise. Sorry. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt a shock and it killed her instantly. It ripped her open. Don't tell me that part. Anyhow, Desi stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, and she couldn't, so I pulled the emergency brake. Then she fell over onto my lap, and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow, he said presently. I'm just going to wait here and see if he tries to bother her about the unpleasantness this afternoon. She locked herself in her room. If he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again. He won't touch her, I said. He's not thinking about her. I don't trust him, old sport. How long are you going to wait? All night, if necessary. Anyhow, till they all go to bed. A new point of view occurred to me. Suppose Tom found out that Daisy had been driving. He might think he saw a connection in it. He might think anything. I looked at the house. There were 2 or 3 bright windows upstairs and a pink glow from Daisy's room on the second floor. You wait here, I said. I'll see if there's any sign of commotion. I walked back along the border of the lawn, traversed the gravel softly, tiptoed into the veranda steps. The drawing-room curtains were open, and I saw the room was empty. Crossing the porch where he had dined that June night, 3 months before, I came to a small rectangle of light, which I guessed was the pantry window. The blind was down, but I found the rift in the sill. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at a kitchen table with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her. In his earnestness, his hand fell upon her covered her own. Once in a while she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody have said that they were conspiring together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi feeling its way along the dark road towards the house. Gatsby was waiting there and had left him in the drive. It's all quiet up here, he said anxiously. Yes, all quiet, I hesitated. You better come home and get some sleep. He shook his head. 1 second. He shook his head. I want to wait till Daisy goes to bed. Good night. Old sport. He put his hands on his coat pockets. Oh, okay. And turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though the presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. Ah, sorry, guys. Pausing for just a moment. Sorry, guys, but someone's a little grumpy because it's time to go to bed, and yeah. So here we go, guys. Let's go back to questions. Okay. 15. What does Gatsby want Daisy to admit? Does she? Is Gatsby satisfied? She does say that, but he's not satisfied because just a second later, she totally, goes back and says, no, I did love him. Okay, what secret does Tom reveal about Gatsby? That, of course, he's a bootlegger, that his drugstores actually sell liquor over the counter, and he says that there's something that he's also involved in that nobody wants to talk about, which is probably that Wolfheim is actually a mobster, and sweetheart, what are you doing? And that he really, 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 really is into some deep, crime, some how should one say, organized crime, like the mob. um what does Nick realize at the end of the scene? Nick realizes that, oh, actually, I'm gonna make you guys search for this one, but let's just say it's kind of easy. um what does Michaelis discover when he talks to Wilson? That Wilson has locked his wife up, that they're leaving in 2 days, and that they are moving to be safe and sound someplace else. What happens on the drive back to East Egg? Describe the interchange between them all, Tom and Wilson. They stop. There's been an accident. Myrtle's been killed, and Tom is Tom's trying to convince him, don't mention my name. It's not my car. Where does Nick and find Gatsby? Why is he there? Nick finds Gatsby waiting in the bushes, just trying to make sure that. Oh, Lily, other side. Sweetheart, you gotta be on the other side. Okay. Sorry, guys. Um, he finds him waiting outside, making sure that Tom doesn't hurt poor Daisy in any way. Oh, God. Lil, I promise one more question, okay? In what condition are Tom and Daisy when Nick looks at them? Okay, so Nick finds them, and they're not upset. They're not unhappy. There's nothing bad going on, but they're just kind of like talking to each other very intensely. And so he's like, they look like they're two people conspiring. So we're gonna have to see how this all works out. Okay. Now I'm so sorry, guys, but evidently Lily requires a lot of attention. Don't bite. And I will talk to you later. I'm so sorry for the interruption. Yes, this is all your fault. Please, no, yes, it's all your fault. Totally. Go on. Bye, guys.